Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Vladimir Putin's push for Pokrovsk has been among the bloodiest in the entire Ukraine war, and it's Russia that is dealing with the most deaths. Thousands of its soldiers have become casualties of Putin's Pokrovsk tunnel vision, and Russia's leader seems to have no regard for the safety or well-being of those soldiers. Russia's troops are being fed to Ukraine. And if those troops don't do exactly what Putin needs them to do, he has no time for them. Putin is abandoning his own soldiers in Pokrovsk, leaving them to die once he feels they've served their purpose. That's according to a Russian soldier named Vladimir Valeryevich Dulyaninov. A commander in Russia's 6th Guards Tank Regiment, the soldier has a terrible story to tell of being left to fend for himself for 6 days in Pokrovsk, where he only managed to survive by eating apples and tree bark. Putin's callousness has become clear to Dulyaninov, and on November 15, the German outlet Focus Online reported on a series of videos that the Russian soldier has made explaining why. Frankly, Dulyaninov should have known what to expect from Russia's leader long before his unit launched an assault on Ukraine's Donetsk strongholds. One of the first things Dulyaninov tells Focus Online is that he received orders from his superiors to shoot 5 of his own soldiers ahead of an operation. Dulyaninov said that he refused the order, which appears to have been given because the soldiers were refusing to take part in an assault on Pokrovsk. However, Dulyaninov managed to avoid carrying out the order by convincing the 5 to join his unit so they could participate in the upcoming attack together. Little did the Russian soldier know that he was likely just delaying his comrades' death sentences. When the time for the assault came, Dulyaninov quickly learned that Russia's top brass had failed to provide almost anything that his forces needed to have a chance of success. The 6th Guards Tank Regiment had no tank support, and the supplies it took into battle were minimal. Ukraine's counterattack devastated the unit, leaving Dulyaninov severely wounded thanks to multiple shrapnel wounds and a leg injury that forced him off his feet. Any civilized country would start doing everything that it could to extract its injured soldier from the battlefield. Russia just left Dulyaninov to his fate. After all, there are always more soldiers to send into the Pokrovsk meat grinder. Beaten, bloodied, and battered, the Russian soldier knew that he faced a choice. He could either die where he lay or attempt to escape without his country's help. For the next 6 days, Focus Online reports, Dulyaninov crawled across the Pokrovsk battlefield. His injury prevented him from walking. However, his biggest problem was something that we mentioned earlier, the complete lack of supplies. Dulyaninov had some of his comrades with him, and they survived on a handful of apples and by eating tree bark whenever they could. There's no damn food or drink here. We're just chewing apples. Before that, I was eating bark. The supplies here are awful. Dulyaninov says. That's hardly news for anybody who has been following Russia's mismanagement of supplies since the beginning of the Ukraine war. Food is often in short supply for its soldiers, as Russia either attempts to cut costs or fails to push supplies to its troops in time for them to launch their ill-fated assaults. The situation is bad enough that many Russian soldiers are having to look toward alternatives to get their hands on even the most basic of supplies. That's according to the Kiev Post, which said in a September 19 report that some of Russia's soldiers have to crowdfund for the supplies that they need. Gas canisters are not issued, F***K. What we get is canned meat, grains, and cigarettes, and that's it, nothing else. The rest we have to buy with our own money, or people send it from home. The outlet reported a Russian soldier as saying during an intercepted call, "It seems like Russia's forces face an either slash or situation." In Dulyaninov's case, his unit at least must have had some gasoline, especially as it operates tanks, but that clearly came at the cost of food. As for the unnamed Russian soldier in the intercepted call, they get food, but nothing that can actually help them to fight against Ukraine. Both situations are desperate, and both highlight just how little Putin cares about the soldiers he sends onto the front lines. They're little more than cannon fodder to Russia's leader, which is why they can be sacrificed and abandoned in Pokrovsk. Other Russian soldiers have it even worse than Dulyaninov. In a sensational piece published by the Express in April, claims were made that Russian soldiers were starving to the point where some of them were resorting to killing and eating dogs just to survive. The outlet posts a snippet of a conversation intercepted by Ukraine's military intelligence agency, or HER, that involves a woman who has acquaintances serving in Putin's military. They've been sitting in a dugout for 2 weeks. The food ran out. They ate whatever they had. The unnamed caller said. Another intercepted call, this time provided by Ukraine's security service, or SBU, saw an unnamed Russian soldier tell a comrade, "It's all F*** ed. Ukrainians are F*** ing beating us like kids. We eat dogs, there's no food. Today we ate a Yorkie, a Yorkshire Terrier." There's only one conclusion to draw from all of this. Russia isn't supplying its troops with what they need. And that was especially the case for Dulyaninov, who was forced to survive on whatever he could find as he attempted to get back to his Russian base near Pokrovsk. But somehow the Russian soldier survived. He even managed to crawl so far that he reached a position of Russia's 24th Brigade, where he thought that he could be rescued and evacuated out of Pokrovsk. Dulyaninov was wrong. All that the soldier discovered upon reaching the base was that his unit hadn't even attempted to evacuate him when he was injured. He had been well and truly abandoned on the battlefield, with his unit simply reporting him as missing instead of trying to find him. That realization led to a bitter proclamation that Dulyaninov made to focus online. The wounded aren't evacuated, they're just left to die. That's what happened to Dulyaninov, but he somehow managed to survive. And once he was able to speak, he had plenty to say about the way his commanders had treated him. The Russian soldier says that his country's new tactic of sending small groups of soldiers with minimal equipment to infiltrate Ukrainian territory is dangerous. Those soldiers are forced to march for days, often attempting to navigate minefields while under fire. And if those soldiers actually make it to the front line, they have virtually no support. It's the deliberate murder of their own men. By Russia, Dulyaninov says, and it's become so bad that Pokrovsk has become worse than the battle that showcased how callous Putin could be about his own soldiers. The Battle of Bakhmut, this is even worse than Bakhmut. It feels like everyone has been sent to their deaths. It's total crap. The beleaguered soldier says, "Young guys, damn it, they're dying here, one after the other. S******. It's F*** ed up." To appreciate the true scale of what Dulyaninov means here, it's important to realize that the Battle of Bakhmut saw Russia lose what at the time seemed like an enormous number of soldiers to gain a Ukrainian settlement. Back in March 2023, when the battle was still raging, The Guardian reported that Russia had already lost up to 30,000 of its soldiers fighting for the city. By the end of the battle, which Russia managed to win through the sheer sacrifice of soldiers that Putin designated as cannon fodder, the casualty count was much higher. How much higher? In June 2023, Reuters reported that some military analysts believe that Russia had lost almost 100,000 of its soldiers in the brutal battle of the city. As for whether that's worse than what's happening to Russia in Pokrovsk right now, there are several suggestions that it is. Writing for his trench art column, former Forbes columnist David Axe proclaimed that Russia had lost 100,000 of its soldiers in the fight for Pokrovsk between January and October of 2025 alone. Bear in mind that the fighting had been going on before the start of 2025, and it is still ongoing. In October itself, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russia had experienced 25,000 confirmed soldier deaths, the majority of them being in the Pokrovsk direction. We published a video covering that bloody month, which you can check out if you want to learn more. That's at least 125,000 casualties in Pokrovsk since the beginning of 2025, so Dulyaninov is right. Not only is Putin abandoning his injured soldiers all over Pokrovsk, but he has lost so many of them that the fight for the city amounts to the single most damaging battle for Russia since the Ukraine war began. Dulyaninov wasn't done with his accusations there either. Not only is Putin abandoning all of his soldiers in Pokrovsk, Dulyaninov says, but he's allowing those soldiers to be extorted as they attempt to survive on the front lines. Russia's soldiers are required to transfer between 150,000 and 200,000 rubles each, which amounts to between $1,840 and $2,460 to what is vaguely referred to as a company fund. The donations are supposedly voluntary, though they're really anything but. And Dulyaninov says that Russia's soldiers never get to learn where that money is sent or how it is spent. Worse yet, he claims, those who could testify against his superiors have been systematically killed, which means that Russia is quite literally allowing its commanders to get away with murder, as it abandons any soldiers who can't serve Putin's purpose. Dulyaninov's story is one of abandonment, anger, and exploitation. But you may also believe that what he reports is an isolated case. Perhaps Russia didn't abandon this soldier to die in Pokrovsk. He may have simply slipped through the cracks, or his colleagues may have genuinely thought that he was dead. As for the accusations about commanders killing soldiers who might know a little too much, or who might refuse to do Putin's bidding, perhaps Dulyaninov has sensationalized all of that to serve his own story. He hasn't. There are plenty more stories about the horrors that Russia is committing against its own soldiers that back up what Dulyaninov has to say. On the abandonment front alone, the evidence is piling up that Putin keeps on leaving his troops to die. Take what was happening on the Dnipro River Delta toward the end of October. On the 23rd of that month, the Independent reported that Russian troops on that delta were stuck in what the outlet calls a death zone that is patrolled constantly by Ukraine's drones. There, those soldiers starve much as Dulyaninov did, and they're resorting to drinking water straight out of the dirty Dnipro River. At least, the soldiers who are surviving are doing that. Since January 100 of Russia's soldiers on that delta have died, some of them due to starvation caused by a lack of supplies. There are plenty of echoes of Dulyaninov's story here, and the odds are that those who are surviving on the Dnipro Delta aren't ever going to be rescued or evacuated. After all, Russia has had a very bad record in that department for much of the Ukraine war. In July 2024, Meduza published an article claiming that even Russian Defense Ministry doctors believed that at least some of the critically injured Russian soldiers who have died on the battlefield could have been saved if they had been given medical attention. The widespread adoption of emergency medical care has been impossible to implement in Ukraine, those doctors say, and Russian soldiers are paying the price. UNN backed this up with an article covering a report from the UK intelligence services that claims that part of the reason so many injured Russians die in Ukraine is that Russia simply doesn't have the time to evacuate them. The lack of armored vehicles and the threat of using unmanned aerial vehicles lead to significant delays in the evacuation of wounded Russian soldiers. The report claims This almost certainly increases the likelihood of more serious injuries and deaths among those who eventually manage to evacuate through the medical system. So, it's not just that Putin is abandoning his soldiers. Russia is so bad at the medical side of war that even those who do get evacuated have a high chance of dying. It's a situation that the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, claims boils down to a grim choice for Russia's soldiers. They fight or they die. The outlet says that many of Russia's wounded don't receive medical care, and those who do experience care that isn't up to the appropriate standard. Putin doesn't care about that either. The soldiers who get evacuated rather than being abandoned are just sent back to the front lines regardless of whether they've healed from their injuries, CEPA claims. Last year, Gennady Krasnikov, head of the Russian Academy of Sciences, boasted that 98% of wounded Russian troops returned to the battlefield. CEPA said in June 2025. He attributed this to the achievements of Russian medicine, but the data showed soldiers who were not fully fit being sent back to fight. But perhaps the ultimate proof that Putin doesn't care if his soldiers live or die comes from Russia's ratio of killed to wounded troops. In October, Politico reported that this ratio stood at 1 Russian soldier dead for everyone. 3 that are injured, which is a ratio so poor that it means that over 40% of Russia's casualties are estimated to be soldiers who are being killed in action. Again, poor training in tactical medicine is cited as a reason for the ratio, but it all really comes back to what Dulyaninov says in his own story. Russia abandons its troops all of the time, and it's doing it again in Pokrovsk. Whether that abandonment is literal, as in Dulyaninov's case, or it happens by way of inadequate medical care or lack of supplies, is irrelevant. Putin sees these soldiers as meat to be fed to Ukraine, and it's clear by now that he's happy for that meat to get ground up if it means that Russia moves even a few feet closer to the city of Pokrovsk. And it's not just abandonment that a Russian soldier has to worry about. Think back to the very start of Dulyaninov's story. His ordeal began when his commanders ordered him to kill 5 of his comrades. Just as with the abandonment issues, this ordering of the deaths of those who don't do his bidding is far from alien to Putin, and Russia's leader is using his country's military commanders to ensure that the fight or die situation that CEPA describes is enforced. On October 30, The Guardian reported that Russian commanders are executing soldiers who refuse to follow their orders to fight in the seemingly endless Ukraine war. In other cases, the soldiers are sent on kamikaze runs that will inevitably lead to their deaths, meaning that Putin gets to use them to waste one more Ukrainian bullet before they die. The Guardian says that an independent outlet named Verska made the discovery after drawing from testimonies delivered by former soldiers, relatives of Russia's dead, and official complaints. Leaked videos were also examined, and the outlet claims to have discovered at least 150 deaths that Russia's commanders have ordered of their own troops. The real number may be much higher, the outlet adds. Troops who disobeyed orders were reportedly thrown into pits covered with metal grates, doused with water and beaten for hours or even days, the Guardian says. The investigation found that in some instances they were forced to fight each other in what witnesses described as gladiator-style battles to the death. And if all of that wasn't twisted enough, an October 17 report from the Telegraph reveals that some Russian soldiers have even been handcuffed to trees and left without food and water as punishment. That combines the worst of two parts of Dulyaninov's story, abandonment, and commanders ordering the deaths of their own soldiers. Suddenly, the soldier's story doesn't seem so out of the ordinary. If anything, Dulyaninov's tale just adds to many other stories of Putin abandoning or otherwise mistreating Russia's soldiers be that in Pokrovsk or elsewhere. With all of this evidence, it shouldn't be a surprise that no medical evacuation team came for Dulyaninov. In the context of how Russia seems to treat its wounded, it's par for the course that the soldier had to crawl for 6 days with no food just to get treatment for his wounds. And it shouldn't be a shock that his former comrades simply assumed that Dulyaninov was dead or missing all along. This seems to be standard practice in Putin's army. As soon as you're not on 2 feet and charging toward the enemy, you're useless to Russia's president. Russia's commanders now see their soldiers as expendable because that's exactly how Putin treats them. In a July article, the Wall Street Journal backed this point of view via a profile on another Russian soldier named Mikhail Simdyankin, a college graduate who signed up for the Russian army after seeing a recruitment poster telling him that he would receive a generous payout for doing real man's work. Simdyankin soon found out what that work actually entailed when he found himself on the front lines in Ukraine just 3 weeks after signing up. Inevitably, Simdyankin got injured. The response from his commanders was to order Simdyankin to charge a ruined factory where over 20 of his starving and wounded comrades had been holed up for months. Ukraine was closing in on 3 sides, the Russian soldier says. Most of the 100 or so soldiers in his group were killed or severely injured. Simdyankin made it out alive, and he had a simple message to deliver while interred at a prisoner of war camp in Ukraine. Our commanders saw us as expendable. They didn't care whether or not we survived. Dulyaninov would agree with that assessment after his own experience, and none of this is by accident. Abandoning troops is by Putin's design, and it's something that we're now seeing in Pokrovsk, just as we've seen throughout the entire Ukraine war. Putin's callous attitude toward his own troops can't go on for much longer, if only for practical reasons rather than compassionate ones. And the reason why is that Pokrovsk is costing Putin in everything as massive Russian troop losses mount, and problems with recruitment are leading to Russia struggling to reinforce its Pokrovsk army. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to Weapons and Empires for more stories that expose the reality of what it's really like to serve in Russia's military